Good afternoon. Welcome to our show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen. Well, it's a milestone here at APTN. 20 years ago this week, APTN News debuted its very first newscast. Back then, it was called InVision. It aired once a week on APTN. It was the world's first national Indigenous newscast. I mean, think of what a huge deal that is. The first national Indigenous newscast in the world. And boy, have things changed here over the years. Today, we're putting 20 years of APTN News in focus. We want you to join our conversation. If you have a favorite news moment, did you have a favorite news personality you want to share a memory about? Our phone lines are open. You can call us toll free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. So let's go back to before APTN was but a glimmer in anyone's eye, and how and why APTN came to be 20 years ago.
Our stories have been passed down for generations. Stories our ancestors told. Stories of strength of our land, the heartbeat of our people, and the music within their souls. These stories trace ancient journeys. There are pathways from where we have been that lead us to our future. We enter the new millennium on a journey in a world of technology. By utilizing this technology, we can gather our nations on the televisions in our homes. The Aboriginal People's Television Network is a new oral tradition. We can tell our stories on this television now, stories new and old, stories of the land and our people, stories of who we truly are from our perspective that we can present to each other in the world. Like two people in different parts of the country who embrace each other by looking up at the same star, the televisions in our homes now bring us together from all directions so we can cherish our families, friends, and visions. So we gather now in celebration of a new creation story, sharing our music and entertainment to celebrate the launch of the Aboriginal People's Television Network.
I like that. APTN is a new oral tradition. So APTN was born, and a few short months later comes APTN News. Back then it was called InVision, and it was first broadcast on April 16th, 2000. Let's travel back in time to that world first national Indigenous newscast with a story from Morin Goo, who was APTN's Mi'kma'ki reporter back then. Let's watch.
Hello, Kichimigwich Kapisiang. Thanks for joining us on InVision, our first news program here on APTN. Before we take a look at this week's stories, we want to introduce ourselves. Behind me in our newsroom from Winnipeg, some of our InVision staff. I'm Carol Adams. My background is Cree and Dene, originally from northern Saskatchewan. I'm your host for InVision News. In fact, the majority of our news, programming, and technical staff is of First Nations, Métis, or Inuit ancestry. They are the people in our newsroom, behind the cameras, and in the control room. Our purpose, telling the stories of our people from the perspective of our people. Since television news first began many years ago, the mainstream media has tended to focus mainly on negative stories when talking about our people. The truth hasn't been reflected until now. We at InVision won't concentrate only on the negative, although negative news may be part of what you see. Instead, we will also include celebrating our people's successes, talking about goals, values, and our way of life. And with that, our top story. A judge in New Brunswick has ruled Mi'kmaq people do not have a treaty right to cut wood on Crown land and sell it. The case involved Joshua Bernard, a Mi'kmaq from the Eel Ground First Nation in New Brunswick. On Thursday, he was found guilty of cutting trees on Crown land without a license. He was fined $300. A similar case is going on next door in Nova Scotia. It involves 35 Mi'kmaq loggers charged with cutting wood on Crown lands in that province. As InVision's Morin Goo explains, one of those loggers charged in Nova Scotia is frustrated over Bernard's conviction.
There's 5 crews in here cutting for about a year and a half, making a reasonable living. No one was getting rich, but we were making a living. That's the main thing.
Lefty Paul checks out the area where he and his crew were cutting trees last year. He took out $100,000 in loans to buy equipment, and he hired up to 20 men to cut trees on Crown land located just outside of his home reserve, Indian Brook. Lefty and his workers cut trees in areas like this and sold the wood.
We were told we had a treaty right to come out and cut. So I was going to exercise my right and come out and make a living. I needed a job, basically. That made me feel real good to see all them guys working and happy, and their kids having, springtime, their kids getting new bikes. Their kids need something, they go out and buy it, no problems.
But the Nova Scotia government disagreed with Lefty. Lefty and 34 other Mi'kmaq loggers throughout the province were charged with illegally cutting and removing trees from Crown lands. Conservation officers with the Department of Natural Resources hauled out most of Lefty's cut and sold it, but not all of it. Some of the remaining logs have been sitting here along this logging trail for almost a year. On Thursday, a judge in New Brunswick handed down his decision in a case that is similar to Lefty's, the Joshua Bernard case. The judge ruled Mi'kmaq do not have an Aboriginal or treaty right to cut and sell timber on Crown lands. Lefty is just plain frustrated with the ruling.
I want to go back to work. I want to come back out here, start harvesting trees again.
The legal battle over who holds title to Crown lands in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia is far from over. Joshua Bernard's guilty verdict is likely to be appealed. In the meantime, the case involving 35 Mi'kmaq loggers in Nova Scotia resumes in Halifax on Monday. That case will hear evidence for the next 2 months before it wraps up. A decision isn't likely until the fall. Morin Goo, InVision News, near the Indian Brook Reserve in Nova Scotia.
That very reporter, Morin Goo, joins us now from her home just a few minutes outside of the Indian Brook First Nation in Nova Scotia. Morin was with APTN from that very first newscast, obviously, in 2000 until she went off for her master's in journalism at Columbia University in New York in 2007. She now runs Goo Gwes, covering Mi'kmaq news in Atlantic Canada. Welcome, Morin.
Thanks for having me, Melissa.
I shouldn't say welcome, I should say welcome back. You've been here, you were here for a long time. It's been a while since you've been back here. So we just watched your first, the top news story of APTN's first ever newscast was by you. How do you feel looking back at that, the historical moment?
Well, actually watching that, I was actually getting chills because it really was a big moment in Indigenous news in Canada. It was the first time that an Indigenous network was broadcasting a newscast aimed at an Indigenous audience in Canada. Yeah. And that was really an important moment there. And I was so glad to be a part of that history making at that time.
Did you feel it at the moment? Do you remember back at that first newscast feeling that momentous kind of historical moment was upon you, or do you feel it now just looking back that's what it was?
Well, not so much, because at that point we were doing some training in Winnipeg prior to that first broadcast, and then we were sent back home. Mm-hmm. So at that point we were doing dry runs, so I kind of felt like I was already getting into a routine of filing news stories for this region, even though this was the first one. But I kind of felt the pressure of doing a story and doing it well and doing it for an Indigenous audience. And I really, really felt like I had to really up my game in that news story and really make sure that I was telling the story correctly.
I'm curious, could you give us a little bit of background onto the preparation for this? Before, you were saying that there was dry runs, there was training. What amount of time between when everybody was hired and trained doing the dry runs until the first newscast? Give us a little bit about what that time was like.
Oh boy. It was about at least 2.5 months before we actually aired our first broadcast. Basically, when I got hired as the Halifax correspondent, along with my other colleagues who created that first newsroom, we were all brought into Winnipeg to do training and to get us really revved up for filing news stories from an Indigenous perspective. So, so we all got to know each other during that time. And, we had to learn, for me personally, I mean, I did have a journalism background in radio and in print, but I really hadn't worked in television. So I had to learn how to be a video journalist. And it was during that time that I actually got to learn how to use a camera because I had to shoot my own stories, So so we got together in Winnipeg, and then we went back into our regions and we started doing dry runs. And it was just, it was really intense. I think our first dry run, we didn't even have tape. We just pretended that we had tape. And then after that, we started getting into a routine of doing phone calls and just sending tape to Winnipeg. And for me, at the Halifax News Bureau, really was my bedroom in Indian Brook First Nation.
I remember you said that. So, I love that. That was the bureau. APTN Bureau in Halifax was Morin's bedroom in Indian Brook.
Yes, exactly. So I did all of my work at my desk in my bedroom. And at that time, all I had, the newscast was recorded on Fridays and then aired on Sundays. So for me, I had to have my story all written, shot, my voicer recorded on the tape by Thursday, and I had to rush to get it onto a FedEx or Air Canada cargo so that it would arrive in Winnipeg on Friday morning in time for the taping on Friday afternoon. So that was very intense for me.
And I'm curious, so you on top of that, so I mean, just the technological difficulties of back 20 years ago compared to what we're doing today. Now you can shoot something live from being on location and it will air on the news now. We have the capabilities of doing that. Back then, as you said, it was, you've got basically 4 days to get your entire story done from all over, Atlantic Canada. That's including all of your travel time. Get the whole thing written on a tape and FedExed to Winnipeg so it can be here, so it can be edited on by Friday, Saturday, and air on Sunday. And this comes from, you were saying you had no TV background at this point. You had journalism experience. You were working in mainstream prior to coming to APTN, but doing radio, doing print. So that makes it a little even more remarkable to make that magic happen. I'm curious what caused you to want to leave mainstream to come for this unknown, this upstart of APTN. What was in your head at the time to make that transition?
Oh, that was really easy. I got my start in journalism 33 years ago when I got a summer job working as a reporter with the Micmac News. That was the newspaper in this region, and I worked there for 2 summers, and that's how I got into journalism. So my goal was always to cover Indigenous news, but during that time, Micmac News folded, so there was no place for me to go to write about Indigenous news stories. So the other option was to go work in mainstream media. But during that time, I found it really frustrating, and this was the early and the mid 90s. When I was working in mainstream for radio and for print. And it was really difficult. I had a hard time selling those news stories. I was constantly told by my non-Indigenous editors and producers that the stories were not broad enough for a non-Indigenous audience, that nobody would find it interesting. And it was just really frustrating for me to find a place to tell those stories. So when APTN went on the air and then they started advertising for positions to create a newsroom, it was a really easy decision for me to apply and do that job. And like I said, I didn't have a TV background, but storytelling is storytelling.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you're telling those stories, as long as you get a chance to tell them. And that's what prompted me to make the move and join APTN.
What is your favorite APTN news memory?
Oh boy, there's so many of them. Getting back to that logging story, that was a story that was ongoing. It was like I got to tell that story in the first broadcast. But the thing is, I covered that story while it made its way through the Nova Scotia courts, and then it finally reached the Supreme Court of Canada in 2005. And because I covered it, I actually got to travel to Ottawa and go in and cover the argument for that case. And it was the first time I was ever given a chance to cover anything at the Supreme Court of Canada. And I swear I would have never gotten that chance had I stayed in mainstream media. It was because of APTN News that I had that opportunity.
You have said, well, actually, before I ask that, do you think that the existence of APTN over the past 20 years, has it changed the landscape of Indigenous news coverage for Indigenous people?
I have to say it does. I mean, like I said, I've been in this business for over 30 years. And I can tell you, when we started working and covering news stories at APTN, I mean, monitoring mainstream news stories about Indigenous people in this region alone, in the Atlantic region, I could count maybe 20 to 30 stories that were covered. And that's the entire region. We're talking about Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick.
Yeah.
And from that, and since then, those stories have increased. I mean, I still keep track of the mainstream news stories that are being filed from this region. And it went from 30 a month up to 150 a month. That's incredible. And it's hard to keep up with that. And I kind of think that, APTN had something to do with that, because we were showing up at news conferences and people were wondering, well, who are these people?
Yeah.
And what story are they filing? But I also think it has a lot to do with Canadians' interest in Indigenous news and how it has changed. In the 90s, you had the, in Nova Scotia, there was the Royal Commission into Donald Marshall's wrongful murder conviction. And that, in Nova Scotia alone, increased some interest in Indigenous stories in this region. Mm-hmm. And then there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. That generated some interest, but not much. What really changed, I think, in Canadian society here is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And their call, and them calling out that mainstream media has to do a better job of telling the story of Indigenous people. And when I was covering those hearings in Halifax back then, one thing I came across was non-Indigenous people in this region who were really upset and offended that they were never told the stories about the residential school in this province. Mm-hmm. They did not know anything, and they were really upset and offended. And I think that sparked something. So since 2010, I've been noticing that the interest in Indigenous issues, especially in this region, is going up. And I think that I've seen the increase in news. That's why I see an act stories in this.
I love it. Just to wrap up here, what about for viewers who want to keep up on what you're doing now? Where can they find you?
Oh boy! Well, since I left, one of the reasons why I left APTN was because when I was going to Columbia, I was learning media skills at the time, and it prompted me to start my own news website, and that news website is called Google West News. And Google West News is actually, Google West means owl in Mi'kmaq, but it's also a variation of my own last name, Gugu. And I've been running it for nearly 5 years now. And I cover pretty much the same stories that I covered when I was working at APTN. I've just basically transferred it and I cover it on my own news website.
Well, I encourage everybody, whether you're in the Atlantic region or not, go and check out Maureen's work. You can find her at Gugugues online and find her on Facebook too. Morin, thank you so much for joining us to reminisce about 20 years ago. That was fun.
Oh, thanks for having me, Melissa. It was great.
Well, nothing here would happen at APTN News without our studio crew, our camera operators, editors, audio, our graphics people, producers, directors. They all make this happen, even though you don't see them. But when we come back from this break, you're going to meet two who have been here for 20 years since the beginning. It'll be like that moment when the Wizard of Oz, when you see the wizard behind the curtain. You won't want to miss it. Stick around. You will love them.
Hi, we're from Squamish Nation, and you're watching APTN.
You're watching APTN, bringing you our lives, our voices.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back. As I said before the break, none of this would happen without a whole lot of people behind the scenes. The studio crew is just one of the cogs in the wheel that brings you these shows each night or weekly, shows like In Focus, Face to Face, Nation to Nation, Nouvelle Nationale, and The Old Laughing Drum, and of course APTN Investigates as well. Ken Welsh, who is APTN's operations manager, and Derek Christensen, who is our director, join us now. Both have been here for 20 years. And are here to serve up all the tea on what happens behind the scenes.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on. Well, I want to ask, so you've both been here for 20 years. You were here since the very first show. I want to ask each of you, what led you to APTN News?
APTN News. Well, when APTN first started in '99, I applied for a different position. And then I waited for more postings, and they decided they were going to do a news and current affairs show. So they were looking for a studio director. So I applied for that one and got hired in January of 2000. At that time there was, I believe, 14 of us here. Head office
Did you
was in
come from
Ottawa.
TV? You'd come from a TV background?
Came from TV background.
Yeah.
Before APTN I was freelancing. I just finished a gig with Women's Television Network called Greatest Spas of the World. Yes. And so that had wrapped up, and APTN was a great opportunity. I'd worked at CTV for a number of years before, freelanced, did a couple of my own shows, one Adventures North and Holly's Woods and Streams, which were both outdoor adventure shows. But yeah, timing was perfect.
I think it's, Ken had gone from my dream job, which was traveling around the world, going to various spas. You were shooting for that show. Were you shooting for? Yeah.
Lighting, gripping.
Okay. And then you come here to put down in Winnipeg and settle down here with APTN. Derek, what was your journey to APTN News?
Well, I was taking a one-year broadcasting course here in Winnipeg, and at the time my teacher was placing another student in the class with APTN, and that was the first time I'd ever actually heard of APTN, and this was in early 2000. So the network had only been on the air for 3 months or 3 or 4 months, and I said to my teacher, I'd like to go there too. And he said, you have to be Indigenous. I said, I am Indigenous. And he didn't believe me. But then he made some phone calls. And
he called David Chartrand, President David Chartrand himself, and said,
yeah.
Is this guy yours?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, he's one of ours. He's with the MMF.
So then, they basically, I came here for my work practicum for 4 weeks. And I started off, they put me in a chair actually right across from Bruce Spence, who's one of the line producers here, has been here for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I was told to write script for a week, and I think I wrote one script story for the news, and then I went and worked with Stephanie Wood, and who's now Stephanie Scott, and
Billy Scott's wife.
our cameraman's
Bill
beloved,
was back
yes.
there, yeah.
His better half. And Rick Harp was there, and at the time Tim Fontaine wasn't there yet, but then I went and worked for them as a researcher. So I kind of bounced around a little bit, and then I worked as a packaging producer at APTN during that internship, and then eventually they hired me for 3 months, and I worked with the studio crew and still doing packaging, and worked as an editor, and then I got hired full-time in September of 2000. So my 20 years is coming up in just a couple months. I
have to ask, does it feel weird being out here in front of the camera?
Definitely.
It's
definitely for me.
Yeah. I know Ken before this said he doesn't like to be in front of the camera, but
I know.
I don't mind it.
Well, I came from a print background before I came to APTN, and like you guys, kind of went and did a whole bunch of different things, and then it was like, oh, you have to be a reporter on camera now. I'm like, I didn't come here for any of that. I'm a researcher. I go do the digging, and they suck you in. As you know, we'll get to that because we actually have a clip of you. Ken, I'm curious, that very first newscast, was there a feeling of just how momentous it was 20 years ago?
It wasn't just a newscast. I mean, it was a studio. It wasn't complete. And as Morin had said, when we started even doing dry runs, we didn't have all the gear even in the building yet. The studio next door had, they weren't pedestals like this, so you couldn't raise the camera up and down. They were all on tripods. We had windows for a backdrop, and of course the sun.
Oh, that's a Portage Avenue.
Portage and the Air Canada Park.
Yeah.
And so we had a few things to do before we launched, but it worked out great. I mean, everyone pitched in, our technical staff, and that department. I mean, they got the stuff that we required, and the edit suites, the cameras, the lighting, dimmers, everything that was needed back then, but not really needed today with the technology changes.
Well, you're saying, we heard before the break, Morin Goo talking about how she would have like 3 days to travel all over the place, gather a story, write the story, voice the story, get it vetted, ship it off on tape to get here to get edited for a Sunday show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and now?
It's all FedExed, and now you can just, this is sort of what the scripts used to look like for the news.
Turn it around so we can see the front of them. Like this is...
And then all the print was, of course, in there.
Is that from the first show?
That's from a Summit of Americas that we did.
Okay.
One of the scripts. And but now, I mean, everything just comes on these, so it's totally different. I mean, you can have your script, story, everything on this, so it's total change.
Well, and it's not just, I mean, the premise of news gathering is still the same, of course. Like, you go and you find a story, you find an issue, you cover it and stuff, but just the technological advances over the past 20 years that you guys have had to keep rolling with the punches. What's been the most challenging for you?
Most challenging? Geez, good question. I'm not sure. I mean, like, the great thing about APTN, even from the get-go, like a lot of people started here, or who were here when I got here, and who have come since then, it's been a training grounds for a lot of people, and it's been fun and challenging at times, watching people grow and blossom into things. And sometimes people come and maybe they can't quite adapt, so it's difficult, and you see them struggle, and that's difficult because oftentimes, you know, one person's struggle in news can become your struggle. Like, as a host, if the people that you're relying on aren't meeting their deadlines, it can make a new challenge for you, and it's the same technical.
It has those moments sometimes.
But I mean, you know, you take some of the good with the bad, and for the most part, it's been really good, and you kind of forget about some of the struggles you have, and you enjoy more of the successes that you've seen. So. And
I mean, APTN is such a breeding ground for cross-training of people. Like, everybody in the studio crew can basically do not just their job, but can do a whole bunch of other jobs too. It's just the nature of how APTN is, including you, Derek, who has been, who ended up being cross-trained to be in front of the camera one time. We have a clip of that, I do believe, if we can roll that.
Good evening. I'm Derek Christensen. You're watching APTN National News.
And it's hard to continue with stereotypes and assumptions when you have friends who can broaden your perspective.
Tonight, social activists and organizations are in Ottawa, hoping a face-to-face meeting will strengthen friendships.
A hero, a friend, somebody that'll help out us people, street people.
Remembering an unsung hero.
They didn't seem to care. That's what the response is. And we're still out here looking, but they know that, and they still don't seem to care.
And we revisit our in-depth report asking who does care about the issue of missing and murdered women. The nation's capital is leaning a little left this week. The People's Social Forum is a gathering of social activists and organizations. Participants hope to make connections and share ideas that will help change Canadian policies.
I don't remember how that came to be. I was up at Investigates where that happened. I just remember that there was a whole bunch of things had occurred, and we didn't have a news host, and it's like, Derek.
Yeah.
Which is very APTN, hey?
It is, because sometimes you get thrown in and you hope that you're going to do well. And I mean, I don't know, maybe my own worst critic, I don't think I did that great. But
it was amazing.
Yeah,
it was great. We all liked
it. Seemed to enjoy it. But I found out that I was about the 7th or 8th string host at APTN, which was nice. And then here I am again. There's a global pandemic, and I get to be on TV. So it seems that when there's a lot of, upheaval in the world, or at APTN, I seem to get opportunities. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you guys very much for taking the time from doing your actual jobs to come on today and chat with us on APTN News' 20th birthday, and to 20 more. Look forward to working with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we have to take a break, sorry. When we come back, she's been here for 19 of those 20 years. She's been a reporter, she's been a news anchor, she was InFocus's very first host producer, and she's now running the place. Our news director, Cheryl McKenzie, makes her return to InFocus. You're not going to want to miss her. Stay with us.
APTN.
Welcome back. We are talking today about APTN News' 20th anniversary, which happens to be this very week. APTN is the world's first national Indigenous broadcaster. Let's take a look back at how it came to be.
As we launch APTN and look to the future, let us take a few moments to tell you how we got here. APTN is building upon a solid foundation, one that was laid by Northern Aboriginal producers in the 1980s. Their efforts to document Aboriginal stories in Aboriginal languages led to the creation of Television Northern Canada in 1991. Since then, TVNC has been broadcasting nearly 80 hours per week of cultural and educational programming in English, French, and a dozen Aboriginal languages.
But when you start digging into the specifics, you start to see that
1996 brought the release of the report by the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. In it, they recognized the importance of TVNC, but saw a greater need for a truly national Aboriginal network, one that was available to all Canadians, reflective of all Aboriginal people, their cultures and languages.
I remain optimistic where our Aboriginal people can stand up and be proud of the accomplishments made through APTN and TVNC.
After consultation with the Aboriginal community and a written application for a national broadcast license, TVNC and its supporters appeared before the CRTC in November 1998.
November 12th and 13th may go down in the history of Aboriginal television as two very important days. Over these 2 days, the Canadian Radio and Television Commission will hear arguments for the establishment of an all-Aboriginal television network.
The Aboriginal People's Television Network will be the first of its kind anywhere. By granting APTN an opportunity to meet this challenge, the Commission will demonstrate its leadership and foresight to the rest of the world.
But I have to say that I can't help but feel awed and humbled by the issues that we are going to be dealing with today and tomorrow.
February 22nd, 1999, APTN is approved by the CRTC. Between then and now, APTN has acquired programming, trained staff, installed equipment, and built a schedule of quality Aboriginal productions. We take these concepts together to bring you Medicine Wheel. All that work and those pioneering efforts of Television Northern Canada has culminated in where we are today, the historic launch of the Aboriginal People's Television Network.
I love that some of those faces are still here now. Yeah. Joining me now is Cheryl McKenzie. She started off here at APTN 19 years ago, so almost since the beginning. She's been a reporter, she's been a news anchor, she was the very first host of this show, InFocus. She's now the Executive Director of News and Current Affairs. Welcome back to InFocus!
Thank you very much, Melissa.
All of our viewers will be happy. I see lots of times people will comment on, like, we'll be watching InFocus, it's like, I miss Cheryl McKenzie. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see if we can bring her back. So we did. There you guys. Everybody who misses Cheryl, we brought her back. How does it feel to be back on set here?
It feels good, you know. Just you're doing a great job, by the way. You're an awesome journalist, and you just really stick to things, and you bring out the stories that people really need to know about that just kind of go by really quick in the mainstream, if at all. Yeah. So I'm just really proud that you stepped up and you wanted to leave Investigates. You left Investigates to come and host the news and take over for InFocus, and really glad that you chose that path.
Well, I am honored that I was asked you that. Big shoes to fill down here in InFocus. I remember looking at it going, I can't do any of that. Just leave me be up in Investigates. It's a tough
weekly show. Yeah, a weekly show.
There's lots of moving parts and bells and whistles, and it's live, and there's lots to do. And Beverly and I are like, we're trucking through. I think we kind of have a grip on it now.
Yes, absolutely. Beverly's awesome.
Beverly Andrews, our producer.
Jumped right into the chair as producer. And there wasn't always a producer for InFocus. No. When it was back, it used to be, I don't know if you want to get into that right now, but it used to be like just a 10-minute kind of little segment on the news. Well, actually, no. Wait, sorry. I jumped ahead to when it came back on the news. There's a bunch of steps in there that from where it started. But as you know, Contact, the old show with Rick Harp, and they're showing some clips of me
is that Contact?
Reading the news. No, that's on the newscast.
Well, that's the news. I have trouble keeping. I have trouble keeping the sets straight in my head. This was definitely news.
Yeah, definitely news, and yes, have to keep a straight face and be very serious.
You do better than I do. I have trouble with the keep the straight face.
Yeah, because often there is so many serious subjects that we're dealing with, and you know, we have to present them in the right context and be very responsible in the way that we're talking about these issues, the connections that we're making. We have to be very responsible in doing that. Yeah. So that's where all of that comes from.
We're seeing Contact. That was the incarnation, or the first phase of look at you. It looks like I borrowed your blazer for today.
As much
2008, hey?
2008, yeah, I was a host producer for that for a couple of shows. And
were you the first host? No, Rick Harp was the first host for Contact.
Yeah, definitely for Contact.
And then Contact changed to InFocus, and then that's when you
because Contact was live every. It was like at first it was only on Fridays, and then I think it was on Thursday nights when I came hosting. And so it went right across the network live. And then when the network split the feeds into the West and put an hour delay onto the West feed so that people in the West could see primetime shows in primetime, we couldn't, they didn't want us to break into all the feeds. And so that's why we needed to develop another show. So Contact turned into the world's first investigative program and InFocus. So we're doing APTN Investigates, as you know.
Yeah, that's when I came on. It was for Investigates and InFocus, but I didn't know necessarily what had caused the break into the two new things.
Yeah. So we did, with the investigative program, there is so much involved in doing an investigative program. So I can't do an investigative program and present it every week with the size of staff that we have. Other big networks can do that because they have like 100 times the staff that we run our shows with. And so we had to investigate and then say, okay, so we need to develop a show that's going to run every second week, aside from investigate. So we're putting our heads together and think, maybe it's got to be like a current affairs show that brings all like the news together for the week and to talk about things and to put things more in context and to bring people who voices are underrepresented in the mainstream newscast or things that are unreported or the angles that you're not seeing out there. And we're all about bringing more context into the news, the headline news, and bringing our own original stories in there as well. So we developed InFocus, and that was actually Paul Barnsley that thought of the name. We're trying to think, what could be the name? What could be the name? And the executive producer of APTN Investigates, Paul Barnsley, thought InFocus. So he thought, hey, how about that?
Yeah. And I can't imagine it being called anything else either. It just is so fitting.
Yeah.
So before you came to APTN, I'm not sure that everybody knows what you did. What were you before you were a journalist? I don't think people know that Cheryl McKenzie can cook.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, my first career was as a chef and cook, and so I was. I did that in my vocation in high school. And but now
there you are with at this point he was he wanted to be
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Was he Prime Minister yet, or was this during the campaign?
He was the sitting Prime Minister then when he was on this set. So it was the first time we had sit down interview with the sitting Prime Minister of Canada was when we did this show in 2016.
And he's not been back.
Even though he said he would. Yeah. We asked him on camera, are you going to come back? And he says, yes, absolutely, and he will. And we've asked him and asked him and asked him.
Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock.
There's still time. There's still time. Maybe before your mandate runs out, if you're reelected, you can make it on.
If you want to get the vote of the APTN viewers, you better get back on here, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I want to know from you, Cheryl, what are kind of the standout moments for you when you look back over 20 years of APTN News?
The standout moments, I think, are definitely when we have like new people coming on who are like straight out of journalism school. A lot of times, we see our interns that come through, they get a chance to have an internship at APTN. We show them like how to file a national news story, and they already come with a lot of those skills already. They just need some opportunity to put that into practice. And so we show them how to do this, and they step up and do these news stories. And then they graduate from school. A job will happen to be open in our newsroom. They'll apply, and then they'll get the job. So going right out of journalism school, right into a national correspondent job. And we have provided that space for numerous journalists to bring them into Indigenous news. And it's just really refreshing to see those new voices coming in and bringing those new ideas, and that APTN, that we're able to provide that space to build our capacity as journalists.
It is pretty amazing when you think of it, and how much has been done over 20 years. This is it's a new news organization, really. I mean, lots of people watching have kids or grandkids that are older than this news program. Really. What's your personal? Is there something that sticks out for you, like your favorite moment, whether it's like a like whoa moment or a blooper moment, or do you have one of those, like something that will always stick with you that you'll look
I guess the story that sticks out in my mind, and we saw a little bit of it on the Contact clip there, was when with the 60s scoop and father looking for his son for like 35 years, wondering where his son ended up. And he never gave up that search. And he's from Sapatowiak. His child was adopted out. And you know what? He found his son eventually in Los Angeles, of all places. And so our news director at the time, Vera Houle, said, "Yeah, you gotta follow the story of their first meeting." And so I was able to go down to Los Angeles with our cameraman, longtime cameraman, Bill Scott. We followed the father down to Los Angeles and caught the very first meeting of the father and son. And just like seeing that moment, you know, they kind of hugged, and then, okay, now what do we do? You know, we're virtual strangers, and just doing that interview with them and talking with them, and then he came on to the show a year after that to talk a little bit more about the struggles that he's having, and even trying to come and visit his own family up in Canada here. And you know, he still doesn't have an Indian status card. You know, that was his birthright all along, and the paperwork is still not gone through on that. So he's really like missed out on a part of his life. And so has his family. And so that story always sticks with me, because I can't think of, you know, like not knowing where your son is. You know, he's out there somewhere. As
you're a mom, like you know, it's easy to put yourself in that position.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many more people out there like that you know, you feel like you don't belong here or there, yet you know it and you can feel it and you can see it. And so that story always sticks out in my mind for sure.
You have so many of those stories that you brought to APTN audiences over 20 years.
All of us have, yes.
Well, I have one of a little bit of a favorite Cheryl Mackenzie moment. I have to figure. Hang on. So this is from 2006. You were hosting APTN National News, just a simple, basic report coming out of Festival de Voyageurs. And the reporter was signing off. She's like, "This is me, Shanine Robinson, reporting from Festival de Voyageurs." Take a look.
It runs until February 19th. Come and check it out. It's fun for the whole family. I'm Shanine Robinson, APTN National News, Winnipeg. Ah! Okay. Whoa! That was fun.
For more information about the 2006 Festival de Voyageurs, check out the website at festival.mb.ca. Our coverage continues tonight on APTN National News Primetime. The latest from the Ipperwash Inquirer in Forest, Ontario. Oh, sorry about that.
It's like you almost had it under control.
That still cracks me up. I know, because what kept me laughing is that the cameraman was Daryl Richard, and I can see his shoulders. He's laughing. The teleprompter, he's laughing. And then they're opening up the mic in my ear until I show how time is left. And I can hear them all laughing. And then at one point, we're just looking at the camera and realize I'm just standing here laughing.
Well, this is what they were saying. Ken and Derek, who were on here before, were saying, you're like, you know, if people are there, if they don't do their job, if you're the host, you know, like it all kind of comes back on you, and that just sums it all up. Anybody's laughing, and you're trying to, and you had it. Like when you came back, you're like kind of a little smile, but you're like, I'm carrying on, I'm professional, and you're reading, and then it just goes completely undone.
Sometimes you can't, and then you know you have to be like really serious, you know. So you're talking about Dudley George at the time. I'm just like, oh no, don't do this.
We've got like 30 seconds left here. 20 more years. Where do you want to see APTN?
We have to grow digitally. We have to get another newscast, probably into another country. That will remain to be seen. But definitely getting more our voices out there, especially from our remote communities. We have to get more into the places that aren't being reached.
I love it. Well, and you're at the helm now, so you can take us wherever you want for the next 20 years. We are all out of time for our look back at 20 years of APTN News. I'm so glad that you could join us to reminisce and hear from the unsung heroes behind the scenes, like Ken Welsh and Derek Christensen, some of who have moved on, like Morin Goo, and moved up, like Cheryl McKenzie, who thank you for coming in. Thanks to all of our guests and our viewers. If not for you, we wouldn't be here for 20 years and counting. Here's to 20 more and 20 more after that. This episode will be available for a download as a podcast on our website, aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great afternoon.
Woohoo! Yay, APTN!
APTN!